Kia ora, talofa, namaste, haere mai, and welcome to this week's episode of the Niche Cast. We're coming at you with a trio of really funky current sporting topics from the land of Aotearoa. We're going to get into a bit of Aotearoa Grizzlies. It's the Grizzlies season. Steven Adams and the Memphis Grizzlies are in the NBA playoffs. And we are going to be previewing their matchup against the Minnesota Timberwolves after they won the play-in game. So big Steven Adams yarns to be had there. We're also coming off a little patch of Aotearoa Wahine football. Ferns played Australia in 2 games and lost both, but scored goals and had a bit of fun. We've also got Aotearoa under-20s Wahine football as well. And Aotearoa's football extraordinaire, the wildcard, can tie both in together. So if you do love a bit of football and Aotearoa Wahine football, tap in there. And then, of course, we've got the Aotearoa Warriors facing the Sydney Roosters, which helps us get into a bit of Warriors mahi, as always. And then we chuck the Kiwi-NRL goggles on, and the Roosters, as announced on the Variety Show and as announced earlier in the year, are the best Kiwi-NRL club in the NRL right now. So obviously, there's plenty of Kiwi-NRL angles to get through with the Roosters as well. So just concentrating on those 3 things this episode. And shout out to the Patreon podcast earlier in the week. We chat big cricket yarn. So if you are a fan of the Niche Case and you want to support us straight up the guts, head on over to Patreon, patreon.com/Our Niche Case. All these links are in the description, however you're getting the podcast. But I do want to shout out the Patreon podcast earlier in the week, focusing on cricket, because we can confirm Michael Kasprich did shit the bed when he described a Pakistani pitch as flat. And then he was quickly sent to the naughty corner, and he came back with good batting decks and all this stuff. So we did get a bit cricket conspiracy on the Patreon podcast. So big cricket focus, bit of black caps, bit of funky shit around the cricketing world as well. We can do big yarns about cricket. So if you do enjoy Aotearoa Cricketing Matters and you just want to support us, head on over to the Patreon. Find that link every Monday and Friday. There's a big email banger as well. Extra content there via Substack. Find that link in the description as well. And of course, we're here as the Niche Case. And what we do every day is write about Aotearoa sport for our website, theniche-case.com. Big yarns, the wildcard's done, big yarns, wrapping up the football Ferns, the under-20s. There's big Steven Adams check-ins as well. So if you do want to dive into that, do that. I've done a yarn about Will Warbrick from Bay of Plenty, bit of Kawaro, and he's signed to the Melbourne Storm, and he has scored 3 tries in 3 games for their reserve grade team. He's gone well. We got Warriors yarns. We got Josh Allaway yarns for the Manly Seagulls. That's kind of where my head's at right now. Focusing a lot on rugby league and having a good old jolly time doing it. Wobbly Wildcard. I believe you have some mindfulness for us to ponder, get a bit in the zone, and apply. Maybe we'll apply it to some of these topics we're talking about today. Otherwise, we'll just apply it to our day-to-day lives, how we're living.
Yeah, go on ancient Zen proverb here on this one. It goes, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water.
The nitty-gritty.
Yeah, the nitty-gritty.
I've actually heard that one before, not with the full context. I've just heard it described as chop wood, collect water, as a, just a way to stay present in the moment and go about your business. So definitely can second that one, because when you're just focusing on the simple tasks that you can do and just going about your daily mahi to be the best person you can be, that's when things happen for you. That's when things open up. And I think a lot of the time we can get caught up in thinking like, oh, how's this going to happen? When's this going to happen? What's going to happen? Like, you can kind of feel it's going to happen. You can sense things are happening or whatever it is. Or like, you're just like shitting the bed with anxiety and stress. Like, it's not happening. Like, whatever it is, you can then chop wood and collect water. And obviously that's a bit of an ancient way of saying, just do what's important now. Do what's important next. What's your next task? What's your next job? Just keep doing that, and then things happen for you.
Yeah, like I looked this one up to see what people's interpretation of it was. And it was slightly different to what I got from it. But the most common thing seemed to be like this idea that, enlightenment is for the mind, and therefore the physical self is unaffected. So what you're doing before you become enlightened, before your mind becomes enlightened, your soul, whatever, what you're doing before physically, you do afterwards, because nothing has changed from that perspective. I also kind of prefer it taken a little bit deeper though into some of the stuff you're talking about there as well, where it's like, because first of all, those are acts of service in their own way. Chopping wood, carrying water, like those are like household tasks. Chopping wood so that you can have a fire, so that you have warmth in the household. Carrying water so that you've got water to drink for the household, to wash the dishes with, have a bath, whatever you need to do. It's not the immediate focus, is it? It's preparing for later so that you're set up. So it's an act of like training as well in its own way, and discipline and virtue and patience and things like that. So you bring in all that good stuff, and then just also like and service as well is always an important one to keep in mind. And then also I think there's a point to that as well, to saying that those in themselves, those tasks, and any task that fits into those categories that you just mentioned, like I think there's something to say that those are enlightening tasks. Like it's not just that you were chopping wood, carrying water before, and then chopping wood, carrying water after. It's like the chopping wood and carrying water is part of the process of becoming enlightened, as far as I see it. Therefore, obviously, you're going to keep doing it afterwards, because it's taking you in the right direction, right? I think that's also a handy interpretation, along with the idea that the mind and the body separate and all those things.
Chopping wood and collecting water is the enlightenment.
Yeah,
because it's the understanding of those simple tasks and the joy they can bring you, the gratitude they can bring you. It is part of the enlightenment cycle situation. Well, and your calf muscle doesn't become enlightened. It's your mind. No. So then it's transferring the mind into physical things that you can do, right?
Yeah, well, like Ram Dass would say, I'm not this body, but I'm in this body. The body is part of the journey, but it's not the thing that's journeying, whatever. There is another one that sounds a bit like that I'm trying to remember how it goes. It's something along the lines of like, first I looked and saw mountains, and I became wise, and I saw no more mountains, and I became enlightened, and the mountains came back, or something like that. I don't know exactly how it goes, but it's something along the lines of like a journey of enlightenment, where as you get further along, you no longer see mountains because you've separated, like you don't see the separateness, you see everything as one, and the mountains are the same as the valleys and whatever. But then you come back around to the point where you started from. It's almost like that hero's journey kind of cycle. You end up where you started, but you're different now, sort of thing. There's some, I don't know, listeners can look that up, something mountains, seeing mountains, whatever. But there is another one like that. Maybe I'll try find it for next week. I don't know.
I think there's a lot of things like that in the world of mindfulness and little gems of information. Let's crack into some Steven Adams kōrero here wildcard, because the big man and his Memphis Grizzlies are in the NBA playoffs. You look around Aotearoa mainstream sporting media, this is not a big topic, but it is something that in the niche case is absolutely fizzing and frothing to work with. Steven Adams obviously represents Aotearoa in a massive way, in a beautiful way, in a glorious way, just being himself. And he is also playing his role, do your job, do your role, in a very
chop wood, carry water.
Chop wood, carry water. That's what Steven Adams is doing for a very cool, funky, fresh Memphis Grizzlies team. And they're coming up against the Minnesota Timberwolves wildcard in their first round of the playoffs. Now we're thinking Steven Adams, we're thinking big man. And that all our focus here, like we're obviously from Aotearoa, so all our focus here is channeled towards Steven Adams, is directed towards Steven Adams, and we're talking about big men. Timberwolves have a pretty decent big man in Karl Anthony Towns, quite skillful, good shooter, but different to Steven Adams. And the Memphis Grizzlies have a bit of a dynamic duo, Steven Adams and Jaren Jackson Jr., two big men with slightly different skill sets that can, like, I'm very optimistic that they can handle Karl Anthony Towns and the other randoms that the Timberwolves have as their big men. Based on what you've seen and experienced in your NBA tracking the season with Steven Adams, or just like general fandom, what do you think this is going to happen with regards to Steven Adams and his game time in the series? But a season context, the first two games between these two teams of the season, Steven Adams played less than 20 minutes in each of those games. Third game, he was out injured, I think. And then the fourth game, the last game between these two teams this season, Steven Adams played 27 minutes in a loss. And NBA stats, but a plus minus. Aotearoa basketball fans will be happy to know that Steven Adams was a negative minus player in all three of those games. So how are you processing and thinking about the Steven Adams versus Karl Anthony Towns matchup, which I believe has to include Jaren Jackson Jr., because just how are you, like, how do you see Steven Adams fitting alongside Jackson Jr. in this matchup against Karl Anthony Towns?
Yeah, this whole Memphis versus Minnesota thing, like series itself, is full of these kind of matchups where it's like, it's a really fascinating one. And I kind of didn't want it for that reason. Like, I thought maybe there's a little bit too much going on, and I don't know if that's the ideal matchup for Steven Adams, because the other opportunity would have been that the Clippers won that playing game, and then he'd be coming up against like old mate Zubac, who he'd probably be able to dominate pretty thoroughly across the series. Although, I mean, if that's the case, then obviously you might get into a situation where the Clippers are going small, and then Adams is forced off the court because of reasons like that. So it can go both ways. You never quite know. But yeah, the Adams versus Towns matchup is tricky for him, I think, because he doesn't always like coming up against stretch big men, like guys who are going to hang out on the perimeter and shoot 3-pointers, because it really does drag him away from the stuff that he's best at. So I wonder how that will go. Like, I suspect, to be honest, he might not guard Towns a whole lot. I think you might see him guarding, Adams playing a bit more drop coverage, and then like Jaren Jackson Jr. pushing up onto Towns in that situation, if that's the case. I was reading about, because Towns actually was quite terrible in the playing game. Like, he was actually awful. I think he went 0 for 7 in the first half or something like that. Didn't make a field goal at all until about halfway through the third quarter. Played through foul trouble the whole time, and even in foul trouble, he kept just doing dumb stuff and picking up more fouls, and then fouled out like relatively early in the fourth quarter, where you're like, well, this is the all-star on this team, and you've been kind of reckless here and left you guys like up the creek without a paddle. But then it turns out not to matter, because he fouls out, and then they straight up go on like a 16-2 run and surge back into the lead and end up winning the game. And Patrick Beverley goes ballistic and jumps up on the scorer's table, throws his jersey into the crowd. And Anthony Edwards was fantastic as well in that game. And it's a good reminder that team might have one all-star, but they got, Anthony Edwards is an all-star in the making. And to be honest, give it 2 or 3 years, he'll probably be better than Karl Anthony Towns. I'm just going to throw that out. Like, that guy's fantastic. He's like a small Zion Williamson. It's like someone took Zion Williamson and was like the mold of him and was like, maybe he's a little bit too big. Maybe it doesn't work. He's constantly injured. What if we made like a 6'8" version of this, or however tall Edwards is? Like, he's a bulky dude for his size, but he's very much a winger. And he's got a decent jump shot and will shoot 3-pointers and stuff. So he's a fantastic player, and does the same barging to the rim and finishing stuff that Zion's good at, but that Zion is the best in the business at, to be honest. So like, I wonder how that works coming back around, because obviously Towns is going to be a lot better, and that's his probably his worst game of the season. He's not going to play at that level again. But I was reading up on some of because apparently he struggled against the Clippers all through the regular season as well. And I was reading an article about that when they were saying the reason they did that is because they just changed up their coverage on him, constantly, different players guarding him, a lot of versatile defenders, which makes me think, first of all, that the Grizzlies have two, certainly one all-NBA defensive player in Jaren Jackson Jr. And I think if Dillon Brooks had been more available throughout the season, he'd likely to be pushing for those teams as well. So they got two elite level defenders. And I don't know how much Brooks will get to play on Towns just because of the size differential, but they do have options for mixing up their defensive rotations and stuff like that. And, Steven Adams is a very good defender himself as well. Dillon Brooks didn't play in any of the 4 games that they played against Minnesota through the season, so that's probably a pretty relevant factor as well, thinking about the series. It can go, it's the same thing as the Zubac thing, isn't it? It can go both ways, because if you're getting Jaren Jackson Jr. to be the primary defender of Karl-Anthony Towns, then you have to ask, what does Steven Adams do? And it might be a case in which you say, well, if he's not really, if we're asking him to guard someone 6 inches shorter than him and faster than him, well, maybe the better option is to just put him on the bench and bring in D'Anthony Melton and slide Jackson to the 5 sort of thing. So there is that possibility. But whenever there's that possibility, there's also the possibility that the 2 big men will just be dominant and they'll run the show, and Adams will be if Adams is boxing out Towns on rebounds and Jackson's guarding him on offense sort of thing, then maybe they've just got this perfect tag team thing where they can just take that dude out of the game, and then each of them, there's going to be someone free on both ends to just feast, basically. So it can go both ways. It might be one of those things where he gets crowded out and it's just a matchup thing where he doesn't play as much as we'd hope. It might also be a thing where he plays a whole heap because it's because that matchup just works in a dominant way for them. And we do know that Ja Morant will be absolutely fizzing for this. You know what a character he is. And Steven Adams led the NBA in screen assists, and that is a major way in which Ja Morant likes to get involved, going around a screen, attacking the basket. So there's a lot of, and Adams has been a really crucial cog in their offense as well. So more so than defensively, I'd add. So there's also that to consider. So it's a fun matchup. There's a lot of ways in which it could go, and it's pretty exciting to see how, because there's a lot of there's a lot of moving parts of this machine, isn't there? It's one dude does well, and then that has flow-on effects or whatever. So I'm just excited to see how it goes. I'm hoping for the because I think the Memphis Grizzlies do have a considerably stronger team overall than Minnesota, even though they were quite evenly matched throughout the regular season. So I am hoping for that dominant, optimistically leaning towards that thing where just him and Jackson can have field days out there and boss this game. But because the Timberwolves don't really have a lot of big man depth behind Towns, so that is another factor to consider. I mean, because on the one hand, I'm a little bit hesitant seeing some of the numbers that you read out before and his minutes and stuff, and knowing that he didn't have the best games against them. But also I'm thinking well, that was regular season. This is playoffs. It's different now. Dillon Brooks is back now. That makes a difference. Everyone's healthy. The 2 of those Grizzlies games were before they sort of flipped the switch, during their 9 and 10 beginnings of the season, rather than their just unstoppable procession that followed that. So every little concern has an asterisk, but every optimistic point also has an asterisk. And I guess that's the definition of playoff basketball, isn't it?
That's a detailed description of because I'm thinking, as you're saying that, I'm thinking this series could either be Steven Adams as a non-factor, or Steven Adams is literally commanding attention from the NBA landscape. Holy shit, Memphis Grizzlies have all this, they just rolled through Minnesota, 2 big men, all that shit. It's a playoff series that could literally go either way for Steven Adams specifically. And as you said, there's just his skill sets you can argue that they aren't necessary and that they are super necessary in this contest. One thing here, Wildcard, 2 things that you've shared with us in writing about Steven Adams and talking about him is his rebounding and his assist ability. You mentioned screen assists, but that's a different thing as well to regular assists. So you might get a situation in favor of Steven Adams. You might get a situation where Minnesota just have no answer, because they are quite a good defensive team, a lot of defensive effort, gritty, niggly, all that shit. But they also might not have a defensive answer for Steven Adams playmaking in the little zones where he likes to play make. Another thing Steven Adams is really good at is rebounding. And apparently Memphis are the best rebounding team in the NBA. You've done a fantastic job of outlining Steven Adams' stats and his record-breaking stuff as well. So if you are listening to this, make sure you check out Twitter or Big Steven Adams Yarns, because there's a lot of statistical record-breaking type information that the Wildcard has shared about Steven Adams. Memphis are first in rebounds per game, 58.2. Minnesota are 16th with 52.4, which is a decent difference, not a huge difference, but also a decent difference. There's also a difference between their home and away rebounding for Minnesota. 54.6 at home, 50.1 away. Whereas you look at the Memphis Grizzlies, 57.5 rebounds at home, 59 rebounds away. And given what you've told me and us about Steven Adams as a rebounder, I am led to believe that these numbers for Memphis are, Steven Adams has contributed and influenced these numbers a lot. And it seems, this is kind of like an entry point. It just seems like those rebounding numbers for Memphis tell us the story that Memphis and what they do is equally as decent home and away. Whereas it seems like a team like Minnesota might be a bit more volatile home and away. And I think that is a celebration of who Steven Adams is, because he's a chop wood, collect water basketball player. It doesn't matter if he's doing that in his home court or an away court. Steven Adams is going to chop wood and collect water for your basketball team. And further to the encouragement argument about Steven Adams in this series, I think his rebounding is going to be quite interesting in the series, as well as his assists. Does anything kind of stand out for you there with his rebounding or assists? Because I've got those, like you mentioned, screen assists. Like obviously Steven Adams, fantastic basketball player, can do a lot of shit on an NBA court. To me, it feels like his rebounding and his assists stand out the most. Do you have any ideas on how those things might be able to be applied for Steven Adams? If we're like venturing into, like, forget the 50-50 argument about Steven Adams might not play a whole lot in this series. We're well aware of that. We're open to that. That's all good. But if Steven Adams is playing more than 20 minutes a game, how do you think his rebounding and assist ability can impact the game for Memphis?
Well, the assists will be interesting to see. Like that'll just be curious to see how much they involve them. And I expect it will be a lot, because I think that's quite an easy set for them, is just to get like the handoff to Steven Adams, sort of in that like elbow position around the sort of free throw line, and just get cutters running around. All like usually Desmond Bain is the best at it, is just like peeling around behind and then they'll bounce pass in, or maybe it's just like if that gets covered, it's just a little handoff toss back to a 3-point shooter or something like that. Also gets a lot of assists, just offensive rebounding and throwing it out as well is another one. It will be interesting to see how that works, like how much they involve that. And I think it will be quite a bit. Like I do think that's something they will try to like, I always think of like when he was in OKC days when they were real good. It was you'd often see him score most of his points just in the first quarter, because it was a deliberate ploy of them just to like get the big man involved early, like make sure he gets some early touches. Not even for him, like it's not one of those things where he needs the touches early on to set a tone to the other team and say like, we've got size, we got strength, we're coming at you, we're going to use it, sort of thing. And then he might not get another shot. Like there would be games where he would get like one more field goal attempt the entire rest of the game in the other 3 quarters, and it would probably be from an offensive rebound tip-in or something like that, rather than a pass, but they always tried to set the tone early. I think Memphis will do something similar just because he is a bit of a unique talent that they have. And let's not forget Karl Anthony Towns, self-proclaimed greatest big man shooter of all time. Only self-proclaimed. I don't think anyone else believes he's ahead of the great man Dirk Nowitzki, for example. But he's clearly a really talented. He's probably the best of that size right now in the NBA. He's a fantastic shooter. Not the best defensive player, like notoriously not the best defensive player. And if you're dragging him away from the basket, as you would be if he's guarding Steven Adams and Steven Adams is playing a bit high in those sort of sets that he gets the ball looking for his assists, not the worst shape like for the Grizzlies to find themselves in. So I do think they'll try to enforce a bit of that. Rebounds, just throw this one, shout out to the man, Funaki Stats on Twitter here, who's done the research. But obviously we know Steven Adams, like offensive rebound, best dude in the league. But you did mention that his team in total, like rebounds as a team, the Memphis Grizzlies, number one in the NBA. That is the 4th time in the last 8 years that he's been on the team that's led the league in total rebounds. He was 3rd last year with the Pelicans. The one year where this didn't really count was that last year in OKC after Russell Westbrook left, and they was tipping the scale into rebuilding. But the year before that they were 2nd. The year before that they were 5th. So he's been he has played a part on the top 5 total rebounding team in 7 of the last 8 years. At some point, that's just not even close to a coincidence. And you look at his stats aren't necessarily the ones that reflect that. We know he gets heaps of offensive boards. His defensive ones aren't always on the same number. But along with screen assists, along with offensive rebounding, guess what? He also leads the NBA in box outs. Box outs don't necessarily mean that the rebound comes your way. It means you take the best rebounder of the other team out of the equation, and maybe one of your guards just swoops in and grabs it. We know that happened a lot with Russell Westbrook. Russell Westbrook used to cop the claim that he was just hogging stats and stealing rebounds from Steven Adams. I'm sure there were times where that was the case, but it was also a deliberate ploy. Like they were trying to get Westbrook the rebound, and Adams was just making sure that the other team's big man couldn't challenge for it. That's another chop wood, carry water thing as well, isn't it? It's like sacrificing your own stats to make sure your team gets the stat. Not a coincidence, therefore, that he's been in a top 5 rebounding team for 7 of the last 8 years, top 3 for 6 of the last 8 years, and the number 1 for 4 of the last 8 years. And there's 3 different teams he's been involved in that time as well. So you can't just say it's the whole, the coaching system or whatever. This also plays into one other point I want to make about the Memphis Grizzlies, which is the way they play as a team, which is always worth getting that identity out there for people who maybe haven't tuned in as closely. The Grizzlies are not a stunning shooting team. Their field goal averages, their 3-point percentages, their 3-point attempts, even mid-table pretty much, across the board. They're just average. They're not bad, but they're also not particularly good. Where they're amazing is in those sort of transitional phases and those chop wood, carry water type stuff where they're fantastic at offensive rebounding and therefore second chance points, fantastic at getting steals and therefore points in transition, points off turnovers, fantastic at screening and great athletes around there as well, like Ja Morant leading the way. So excellent. And the offensive rebounding plays into this as well. Therefore, points in the paint, those things add up. They're pretty much the best in the business at those things. And if you're good at those, points off turnovers, points in the paint, and what was the other one that I said? Second chance points. That's a team who maximizes their opportunities. And that's where they do so much damage, because you're you think you've got to stop, and then all of a sudden Steven Adams has got the offensive rebound and you just straight back where you are and they get a second opportunity. And the Grizzlies are incredibly good at that. They're a very good defensive team, and they transition that defense into scoring points as well. That's how they do it. That's how they beat teams. And it comes down to a lot of fundamental type stuff, isn't it? It's focus, and it's everyone moving in the same direction, and it's aggression and not slacking off and all these things, like keeping your standards up. That's one thing. They dropped a couple of games after they clinched the second seed, and their coach was just on them and you know, in timeouts where you could hear it, and also in press conference afterwards saying like, we let our standards drop. That's not good enough. That's not who we are as a team. Like, just making sure to stay on it, even in meaningless games like that. So you know that they're going to come out fired up for the playoffs with that exact same kind of thing. That is how they play. It suits Steven Adams to an absolute T. And Minnesota Timberwolves are going to have to try and keep up with that. They're going to have to try and, you know, limit Steven Adams on the offensive rebounds. They're going to have to limit their turnovers and all these kind of things. They're going to have to try keep Ja Morant out of the paint. Like, all those things are easier said than done. But those are going to be like massive factors in determining whether the Grizzlies, because if the Grizzlies can get what they want in all those scenarios, they're going to cruise through the series in like 4 or 5 games, you know. But if Minnesota can limit them, suddenly we got a pretty competitive series on our hands.
Everything you just described smells like a good team. Like,
yeah, for sure.
In this context, a good basketball team, because there are clear signs of all the things that you need to do, chopping wood, collecting water. This team does at a very high level. And of course, being from Aotearoa, we're obviously going to big up the man, Steven Adams, for his role in that. And I think that's actually really interesting, because there are some rugby league ideas that I think fit into the same category later on when we get to the Warriors. So yeah, pretty exciting to see Steven Adams in the playoffs again. This dude is probably Aotearoa's best basketball player ever, even though he hasn't represented Aotearoa yet. And he had a run with Oklahoma City Thunder. Like, it was kind of early in our niche case days where Steven Adams was playing in playoffs, and it was like a bit, looking back, it was a pretty amazing thing, but it didn't really feel amazing at the time. And now here we are in a team that feels even more Kiwi than that Oklahoma City Thunder team. And it's just, it feels Laturu Taylor taking a wicket type of magic situation here with Steven Adams and the Memphis Grizzlies. So we are incredibly excited. Hopefully you're excited as well. And we'll obviously be tracking this a lot in our podcasts, on our Twitter, and just articles as well, and the email banger. So if you do love a bit of Steven Adams, if you do love a bit of just a Kiwi bloke fitting into one of the biggest sporting competitions, sporting leagues in the world, big up the man Steven Adams, as well as Sean Marks. Interested to see how Sean Marks wiggles through this next little stage with the Brooklyn Nets. They won their play-in game, which was good to see. And yeah, shout out Sean Marks.
Yeah, they've got a very informed Boston Celtics team in the 2 versus 7 seed matchup. So that's going to be tough, because like Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving were fantastic in that play-in game for the Nets, and still it was a lot closer than they would have been comfortable with. So there's definitely a question of whether they have like the depth behind their 2 superstars to do what they need to do. But if you got those 2 in the same team, and Kyrie Irving is allowed to play all the games now, which just helps, they're going to be competitive at least. But yeah, that Boston Celtics team have done a bit of a Memphis Grizzlies over the second half of the season, and just like really figured things out after a slow start. So that'll be a tough matchup for them.
I would like to see, well, I'd like to check in more with the Brooklyn Nets when there's actual like a full off season for Sean Marks to implement some things, because at the moment he's just kind of been reacting to, yes, he's the GM, but he's also had to react to what Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving want, what they're doing, you know, what their needs are, what their desires are, what their actions are. Sean Marks doesn't really have that much power over those dudes. So he's just been reacting, and I'm curious to see what he does with just the period of building and what he can do with that team over the next kind of year or two as things get a bit more interesting with the Brooklyn Nets. Aotearoa football here, Wildcat. I'm going to start. Throw a little doosra at you here. Sorry, I shouldn't say throw a doosra. That's insensitive. I'm going to bowl a doosra to you here, Wildcat.
Bowl a doosra within the standard allowable 15 degrees of elbow bend.
We got a bit of a going on. Can you describe in one word? I'm looking for one word for the football Ferns and one word for the under-20s, both of whom have played games against Australia recently. We'll get a bit into the nitty-gritty. We'll chop some wood. We'll collect some water here. But for just curious, just to sum up your experience of just a big week of women's football for the land of Aotearoa, what's one word to describe the football Ferns after their series against Australia?
I mean, the phrase that comes to mind is work in progress, but that's not one word. So
That's
we'll
right,
say,
right.
let's go with, okay, work in progress. We'll hyphen them all so it's the same as one word.
Just like a modern name, you just hyphen it all up and it's all good. Work in progress for the football Ferns. What do you reckon for the under-20s?
Exciting.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Both terms have a bit of a positive tinge, which I like to see. What a challenge to you here. Was there like a common thread between the football Ferns and the under-20s? Was there something that, because you would have watched all these games, you've talked about them, you've written about them, you've shared information about them. Was there something that you observed from the football Ferns and the under-20s, Wahine, that was shared between them in your mind, your observations, your insights?
Conceding goals against Australia from corners was one of them. I mean, I could come up with a couple of sort of smaller things. I think the most interesting point, though, is the one in which they don't align, and that's in the sort of like attacking player area. Because if you look at the football Ferns as a work in progress, like defensively, they got a lot of good players. And they did extremely well in that first game in particular against Australia to repel them for as long as they did against just like back to the wall kind of thing. Claudia Bunge and Michaela Moore both had excellent games through both of the matches. But I think losing Rhea Percival, and I don't know, might come back to that idea, but losing Rhea Percival was a major factor in them just like not being able to enforce themselves on the game whatsoever. I do think that midfield combination is going to have to change in some way. And I suspect that Malia Steinmetz might be the big beneficiary of that, like the one true like number 6 option, like defensive midfielder that the team really has at the moment. But we know their biggest problem going back quite a while, like playing without Rhea Percival is a very new thing. She'd played 29 starts in a row. So they're extremely used to having her around. That's not something they were obviously prepared for. Not scoring goals is something that has been a worry for them for a considerable amount of time. I mean, the football Ferns scored in both those games. The under-20s scored in both those games. It was 1 goal in all 4 of them, like for the New Zealand team. So it's not like one was running away from things. It's a little bit more about just like styles and approaches and stuff like that. But if you look at the football Ferns, and one of the reasons they struggle with creativity is because they don't really have creative players. Like I was watching a bit of USA versus Uzbekistan the other day, which first of all, it was like, why is Uzbekistan playing USA at women's football? Like an amazing opportunity, I'm sure, for the Uzbekistani players. But like the scores were 8-1 and 9-0. I don't know what America gains from that, but like you're seeing America was playing without, Rapinoe and Morgan and Tobin Heath wasn't there and Kristen Press wasn't there. And Carly Lloyd's retired. So she was commentating on that game. And like, you look at some of the players they didn't have, and yet they've just got this procession of just incredible, like really fast, really skillful, beating players one-on-one, just attacking weapons. And Australia are not as good as America. America is the best in the business, but Australia is a pretty good team who are going to make knockouts at World Cups and will probably be hoping to at least make the quarterfinals when they're co-hosting the next one, if not the semis. They've a strong team with a lot of players playing for like Chelsea, Manchester City, like Lyon, Arsenal, like big clubs. A lot of the strong clubs in America as well. Like they always looked faster and stronger, and they could jump higher, and like just athletically there was only so much the Ferns could do against that. And the fact kind of is that we don't produce those types of players. We don't have players. I mean, Paige Satchell is probably a rare exception of a New Zealand attacker who's lightning quick, but that's lightning quick with an asterisk because she's still like herself a work in progress in terms of getting the final product, the delivery into the area, the finishing and stuff like that. Has made huge strides over the last couple of years playing in the A-League, so definitely going in the right direction. But a project player who for Australia would be on the fringes of squads rather than getting starts every game kind of thing, because we don't produce that many players, which is why that under 20s sort of little couple series, 2-game series there was really interesting, because you did have just a few more of the types of players that we don't really have an equivalent in the senior team, like Alyssa Wynnum, who is there in the Football Ferns team, who plays in that type of way. Olivia Chance is the closest comparison, and it's not a straight comparison. They're both very creative passes, but Wynnum is also someone who will take players on one-on-one, whereas Chance is a bit more of a I think Liv Chance is borderline the best Football Ferns player at the moment now that Rhea Percival is injured. But I'm just pointing out stylistically rather than ability, they're a bit different. Wynnum is a unique kind of player. You look at some of the forwards that were getting games for the Football Ferns. It's girls like Gabby Rennie is 20 or something like that. Ava Collins is about 19, actually still eligible. The only player in that squad who's still eligible for this under 20 World Cup at the end of the year. Grace Jale is about 22 and just finished her first professional season. Jackie Hand got COVID, so couldn't play on this tour, but has been a part of recent tours. She's 22 or something herself, hasn't yet played professional football. A lot of really young players in those areas, which shows that maybe we're developing a slightly the types of players we haven't developed, and it's been a problem that we haven't developed those types of players in terms of being a more attacking team. Maybe that's starting to change. If you just look at the fact that the players who are getting in those positions now are a lot younger, you look at an under 20s team that has players that are a little bit different to the types that have come before. I thought Millie Clegg was super, for someone who I hadn't seen play at all, I don't think, before the series. I was incredibly impressed with what she did. A genuine striker, goal hunting striker who can turn a player and has an eye for goal and is going to be aggressive and trying to get there, who can hold the ball up, who looks strong and athletic and stuff like that. That's incredibly exciting, because you don't get those players otherwise without an asterisk. It's yes, they can do this, but they also can't do this. It's the trade-offs. Well, here's someone who looks like she might be an actual well-rounded number 9. Don't really have one of those, and that's I think that's pretty exciting to think of that. That's one of the reasons why I say this team is quite exciting. That, and also the fact that thanks to their Wellington Phoenix experience that a lot of them have, they've actually got a bit of a head start on most under 20s teams in terms of they've already got a style of play. They've already got combinations going. And at the under 20 World Cup in Costa Rica in 4 months, in August, I think it is, that's going to be something to get quite interested in, to see how they translate that against other teams and other teams at the same age grade. And I think they might genuinely do quite well. I'm excited to see how that goes. They weren't at full strength either for this thing. There's 3 or 4 quite potentially really important players who weren't there as well. So cool. That's very promising. That's very exciting. But also that point about some of the players that are coming through are a little bit a different mold to the players that we've had before. Don't think this is gonna, I just don't think we've got time before the 2023 World Cup for that to blossom and show and take full flowering, to keep the blossoming metaphor going, in that tournament. But come 2027, the time afterwards, and keep in mind that Jeka Klimplova is not just contracted until the next World Cup, she's contracted until that 2027 one afterwards, a long-term contract there. Maybe that's when we'll start to see a little bit of a different, what's the scouting report's going to look a bit different on the Football Ferns when some of those players are starting to get through to that level. So that's the hope. But yeah, it's one of those little bit of a jarring thing over that Ferns series, just seeing the ways in which we struggle to compete just because we simply like it's not a matter of our tactics should be better, we do this better, we do that better, more like it's just we simply don't have the players to do what a team like Australia can do. That's frustrating, but it's also you got to be realistic with it, right? You can't will something into existence that isn't there to begin with.
I imagine it was good for you because those ideas would have been front and center and at the same period of time. Like the football Ferns are lacking these types of players. And then the next day you're watching the under-20s play and they have these types of players. So you it's overlapping. It's not something they have in common, but it is something that there is like a string through both teams, which is interesting. Specifically with the football Ferns, and I imagine if the football Ferns... so the football Ferns, what is a prototype of a player that they do have a lot of?
Centre backs is always pretty good. Hardworking midfielders, although we probably need a few more hardworking midfielders. Now that Rhea Percival isn't there to do the trick, but those kind of players who can. Let's keep the theme going. This might have to be the title of the episode, but players who can chop wood and carry water. What we need also is players who can do magical stuff on top of that, like just a few, just some special players on like to mesh with that. You've got the fundamentals, you've got the basics. A lot of players who can do the instructions, what needs to be done, but then also like who's gonna. Okay, so. You've got players who can chop wood, but who's going to light the fire, right?
Bit of a spark, you need
spark.
Sparks to
That's
light
a good
your
one.
fire. And I imagine, because I mean, we're not like these are the types of players that Aotearoa is built upon. Like these are the types of athletes that like we've just spent half an hour talking about Stephen Adams chopping wood, collecting water. So we don't have a shortage of those type of athletes. So I'd imagine the under-20s team has a bit of a combination because you're saying that they have more naturally gifted athletes, more impactful athletes and footballers who are the spark. We also know that Aotearoa football, as you said, has a lot of like solid, hearty defensive players. So is the under-20s like a combination of those ideas, whereas the football Ferns right now is kind of a bit more skewed to the chop and wood collecting water? And you're kind of looking at the under-20s team thinking, there's a bit of both, and that's what you need in any sports team.
Yeah, there definitely is. Like because they drew their second, they lost 5-1 in the first game against Australia, but they drew the second one 1-1. Millie Clegg scored a lovely goal, and they defended really, really well. Like it was, it helped that they had an all A-League back four on this occasion. You had Marissa Vandermeer of Manchester City at left back, and then you had three Phoenix players, so McMeekin at right back, and then Kate Taylor and Te Moana Walker and centre backs, like A-League calibers across the board. And you saw them playing like the Wellington Phoenix that, it's Gemma Lewis is coaching both those teams. So again, it's not a coincidence, but you saw them like trying to play a high line, trying to be aggressive, trying to like dive into challenges, win the ball, don't let it bounce, like being, just the aggression and defense was the same as we saw from the Phoenix throughout. So, and this time against like an under-20s team of similar, like the Aussie team was all domestic as well. They tend to develop players in Australia and then they go overseas afterwards. It's a little different to what you see in other, like no one's going, like they have good pathways for Australian players in Australia, and the A-League is a big part of that. So it was an A-League based squad pretty much entirely from Australia. So players of the same level and the same age, it does make a difference, because that's the other thing about when you talk about someone like Millie Clegg looking like a great athlete playing against 18, 19-year-olds. Developing that into being able to do that against like 28, 29-year-olds at an international level is a big difference. That's a huge leap to cover, like a lot of ground to make up there. So it's not one of those things where just because players look good at this level, it's a guarantee that they're going to all come through and be amazing by 2027 World Cup. That there's no guarantee there whatsoever, but they're at the stage where you want them to be at this level. So that's nice. And yeah, like there's definitely is that combination. I'll chuck out as well that I think the All Whites are probably a couple years ahead of this thing, because it's a similar thing where you think about like the squad that went to the 2010 World Cup was full of a lot of those types of like supreme battler type players, like the best version of that. But Ryan Nelson was a hard tackling, ball winning centre back. He wasn't a silky midfielder or anything like that. But now we have Joe Bell and Marco Stamenic, who kind of are silky midfielders, like in Sarpreet Singh as well, and Ryan Thomas, like guys like that. There's actually, and it's not just one or two other, like I just named 4 really, really good players who can play those positions. Like the All Whites were in the same position once upon a time. They're a few years ahead of the football ferns, and that some of these players have developed earlier and just had a head start, or just the generations have been a couple under 20 waves earlier. Probably is the case, but like they've gone through the same journey, and they might be at a point now where we're seeing what that looks like when it actually comes to fruition. So hopefully the football ferns are just like 3 years behind where the All Whites are, and we'll get there sooner rather than later.
What's the hard and fast bio on this Clegg player, lady?
Millie Clegg.
Where's she from?
She is in Auckland. She played for Bucklands Beach as a junior. I didn't know bugger all about this. I've done some research myself trying to figure this out. Plays for Auckland United now, sort of, Northern Women's Premier League. So the highest current domestic Winter League phase. And Auckland United will be a National League team at the end of the year as well, but didn't get to do that last year because National League, the Auckland teams weren't involved. It was the South Central Series, and probably too young the year before that. So I hadn't actually checked whether she popped up on like an Auckland bench or something at some point as like a 15 or 16-year-old, maybe. I don't know. But from what I gather, played a lot of boys football at Bucklands Beach before going to Auckland United. So a lot of her development actually came playing like under 15s, under 17s alongside the lads, and scoring goals, because there are some videos around on the internet as well. Like she's scoring heaps of goals at that level. There's no dramas whatsoever. She's and what I like about it is she does look like someone who has a hunger for goals as well. Like you want players who are going to be team first and all that, who will, chop the wood and carry the water, but you also do need someone like, and probably a couple of players, like it just really helps to have someone who will do that, but also will be like, I'm going to cut a corner here and just make sure I score a goal. I'm going to follow up on this shot and put it away because like this is what I do. Like I score goals. A poacher, a finisher, you know what I mean? And she seems like someone who has that very much in her locker, that instinct, and that's again beautiful to see.
Chopping wood and carrying water. When I think about rugby league and I think about what the Warriors are doing well, I'm thinking chopping wood and carrying water. I'm thinking about a forward pack led by Adam Whenua-Blake that can go forward. And I'm thinking Sean Johnson kicking the footy into space. Because I think Warriors fans have become very well acquainted with penalty kicks that go 10 meters. Like, I don't know if it was like growing up watching Stacey Jones or some shit like that, but like anytime there was a penalty kick, especially if it was in the middle of the field, you were chewing off 15 meters, 10 meters. Whereas some of the kicks Sean Johnson was doing on the weekend, a penalty in the Warriors half, if he's kicking 30 meters, well, then you're in good ball down the other end of the field. And it's a very different equation. And I think and then you combine like Reece Walsh and Chanel Harris-Tavita both have left boots, and the way I'd describe it is to think of them as one kicker. So it's not about, we're just looking for 2 kicking options here, Sean Johnson and a left footer. So Reece Walsh and Harris-Tavita, their kicking games combine for 1 total kicking game, because Harris-Tavita's got a limited kicking game. Reece Walsh is a fullback who might have 2 kicks a game. Whereas Sean Johnson's doing 10 kicks, Harris-Tavita and Walsh might combine for 6 kicks. But they're both left-footed. So if you've got a forward pack that's going forward and you've got Sean Johnson executing a solid kicking game, and you've got a left-footed kicking game, and all the other blokes are just running hard and supporting the inside men, defending for each other, that's a rugby league team that is chopping wood and collecting water, which sets up their game against the Roosters. And obviously the Roosters are favourites here. But I do see a situation that could happen where the Roosters are off for whatever reason. It's happened before against the Warriors. There have been games when the Roosters have been below par, Warriors have been good, they win. This time around, though, it doesn't feel like the Warriors need to be good. They can just do their chop and wood collecting water. And if the Roosters are off, they're going to be in the mix. And it's all just kind of, a lot of it stems from Whenua Blake being one of the best props in the NRL and Shaun Johnson being one of the better kickers in the NRL as well. And I think that's just I don't think it's reason for optimism. It's just maybe I'm just finding greater clarity in what this team is. And if you've got a team that more often than not is going to have a better forward pack and you've got good kickers, you're in the mix. And I think that's a simplified way of viewing Warriors footy. And I think a lot of people tend to complicate it. Look, whether it's looking for the razzle dazzle, whether it's looking for more of a grinding style of footy, or just like this player's doing this player's shit, this player's that, whatever it is. Like, I don't know. But this Warriors team, Whenua Blake's leading the forward pack, Shaun Johnson's leading the rest of the team, and they both have skills that give the Warriors a chance, and then it's just up to the Warriors because I actually think under Nathan Brown right now, the team is executing a very simple style of footy led by those ideas, but also if everyone just runs hard, it's going to be okay. If everyone rips in defensively, it's going to be okay. And like Reece Walsh is defending the try line as best as he can, which is a good example. Like, he's trying hard. Wade Egan's a little bloke who plays 60, 70 minutes in the middle of the park. So it just seems like a very basic Warriors team. And I'm curious how that basicity, that's not a word, but I made it up, against the Roosters go. Because as we know, the Roosters could just be too good. But also the Roosters, if they don't show up, the simple, basic nature of the Warriors could step in to do some things.
Yeah, a lot of what you're describing there sounds to me like a definition or an explanation of like what people mean when they say the arm wrestle, or I don't know, it's arm wrestle. Tug of war seems like more of a better metaphor, like the push and pull sort of thing going on between one team has a set, the other team has a set, the other team has a set, back and forth over and over. And if you like, if you are getting go forward from your forward pack, which is where that stems from. Otherwise, you're talking about line breaks and like shifting the ball and stuff, which is not basic, not really basic game plan. That's more of the razzle dazzle stuff.
That's Melbourne Storm footy.
Get
to the edges,
exactly.
Go around them.
But if you're like rolling through the middle, getting 10 meters a carry and making sure you get like that sort of, that 50 meter gain with 45 to 55, whatever meter gain every set. And then you get a good quick kick away. And then the other team starts from within their 20 first tackle, they're unlikely, unless you make a mistake, miss a tackle, or they, do something special. Unless you're playing the Melbourne Storm, like, you're then in a good defensive shape in order to keep them from being able to get an attacking kick, which might lead to a try, to get them, kicking long at the other end. And then you do the same thing. Like, that's the tug of war, isn't it? It's like going back and forth. And it is a basic game plan, and one I'm very accustomed to because I'm a Dragons supporter. So I've had a decade of watching teams try to play exactly that kind of way. I'm currently watching a team who is trying to play that way with no capability of being able to do it because they can't get any meters up the middle. Decent kicking game though. I do like old Ben Hunt off the boot. Wish he had some help, would be beneficial. But So it goes. But yeah, that's how you get yourself into the game, isn't it? Into the contest, is being able to do those sort of fundamentally type stuff. And then it becomes a matter of like, who blinks first, who's going to make the mistake, who's going to do something special, who's going to break this game open in some way. That feels like where the Warriors might probably going to fall short. But having said that, like, Reece Walsh can certainly spot a gap in the line, and he can duck his head through and off you go. Shaun Johnson can do that in a couple different ways. He can do it as a runner, and then increasingly over the last like sort of 3 or 4 seasons, we've seen he can do that with a pass or a kick as well. And Chanel Harris-Tavita is a pretty highly skilled player in his own way as well. So like, when the Warriors complete at a high percentage and don't make the kind of mistakes that cost them, same as any team, I suppose. When you make mistakes, it's the first thing you can do to just like spoil everything else, because it's hard to get those good like sets and then a good defensive kick and then starting aggressively defending if you're giving the ball away in your own half, dropping the ball and tackle 2 and stuff like that, and giving away penalties defensively as well, and just like piggybacking the other team down. Like, if you do those things, you're probably going to lose anyway. If you're doing that more than the other team, that's the easiest way to sabotage yourself. But yeah, like, I mean, the Warriors do have a team that is capable. Like, we've seen this over the last 3 weeks. Like, they're pretty good at doing those, doing all those things that you described earlier, and they do have a bit of flash and pizzazz in there as well. So that, like, if they can keep it close, they're going to be in games. I think the big test is, can they continue to chop wood and carry water against a much, much better team in the Roosters than any of the teams they've beaten in the last 3 weeks, or any of the teams they've played at all to this point of the season. Because the fixture list has been kind, and it's going to balance out sooner rather than later. So I think this is a pretty big test in terms of seeing where the Warriors are actually at, to be honest, because I don't know that we've really learned a whole lot in the last 2 weeks. We've seen like similar performances where they've been able to grind out wins against weaker teams or weaker performing teams on the day, sort of thing. Roosters are not that. Like, Roosters is a big shift. Like, it's a massive leap from what they've been doing to get wins to translating that into against a good team. But I mean, if you, like I say, you don't make mistakes, you're in the contest playing that style of footy.
2 things stand out about like how NRL footy is played right now, and one of them is the kicking. So if you take Shaun Johnson out and you have Cody Nikorima at halfback with this current team, you're not getting the same kicking, because Cody Nikorima can't find open pasture within the opposition 20-meter zone on their try line. So then you're putting more pressure on Reece Walsh and Chanel Harris-Tavita and their kicking games. Whereas Shaun Johnson, you mentioned the Dragons are in the contest because they got a rugged forward pack, and Ben Hunt can kick a footy, right? It's just a good starting point. And then you think about the best halves in the NRL. Nathan Cleary is the best half because he's got the best kicking game, among other things. Like, you have to do other shit. You got to run the footy, tackle hard, and all that. But Nathan Cleary's got the best kicking game. Mitchell Moses can absolutely destroy a kick. Like, he can kick it the whole field, let alone his attacking weaponry. Let me look around. Who else is some of the other halves? Jerome Hughes, fairly decent kicking game. Nico Hines. Like, Jerome Hughes and Nico Hines were fullbacks at the Storm system, and they are currently, obviously, Hughes halfback at the Storm, Hines halfback at the Cronulla Sharks. Both of them have long kicking games. And that is so crucial, to the point where if you take Shaun Johnson out, it changes how the Warriors have to play their footy, because whoever else is going to play halfback can't kick the ball like Shaun Johnson can. Another thing is how direct the runners have to be. And I said this maybe last week with Chanel Harris-Tavita. And when you're watching the Warriors, there's a lot of very direct running. Marcelo Montoya is out this week, and Dallin Waitene-Zelezniak comes in. What do we know about Waitene-Zelezniak? Runs like a psycho. And that's going to be good. Jesse Arthurs is finding a bit of form, and he looks like he's like got a NOS canister in his shorts compared to what he was doing at the Broncos. Like, he's just running faster. We saw a bit of Sean Johnson running game step in and all that stuff. But when I look through this team, because obviously we've talked about Fanua Blake, but Matt Lodge is pretty good running the footy as well. And all the other blokes in the forward pack and the team, everyone is capable of very direct running. And when you're doing that, it opens up everything else around you. So again, that's another chop and wood carrying water thing, because everyone runs the footy hard and direct. So when there is a subtle shift, it opens up space. Like, every time Chanel Harris-Tavita runs the footy hard, he is setting up the next play when he skips to the outside, throws a cut-up ball, and the Warriors score. Because everything is drawing the players in. Whereas I think the bad NRL teams, especially the bad halves, they don't run the footy. Or blokes are running sideways, they're going that way, there's a lot of passing. Like, I think teams might want to throw the footy around and get into a bit of that Melbourne Storm shifting the footy type of footy. But if you're just passing to the sideline, you're not actually doing anything. Even if you are executing like a decoy play, second man play, well-designed play, you're just moving the footy out to the sideline. Whereas the good teams, whether it's a half, whether it's a center, whether it's getting the edge forward involved, like, what does Ewan Aitken do? He just gets the footy, he runs very hard.
He certainly doesn't pass.
Yeah, he's not.
He never has.
He's not a Wade Graham, right?
No.
Like, he's Ewan Aitken, and he just gets the footy, he runs. I've had some really deep thoughts about Katoa and Sirinen, which I don't really want to get into, because that opens my mind. Like, Bailey Sirinen might be better as an edge forward in this team because he's doing all the other shit. Katoa runs the footy very hard, but Bailey Sirinen might be better at working defensively with the half alongside him. He might be better at running a decoy, running through the line. Because I've thought, like, why isn't Katoa just starting edge forward every single week? Well, there are other things that are part of that job that you have to do. But then if you get Katoa coming off the bench, what does Katoa do? What does Aaron Penny do? What does Bunty Afoa do? They all run very hard and direct. What is Cody Nikorima's best skill set? He's a whippet. He's fucking fast. He's skillful. So that adds something. And I think I'm kind of talking myself around to the Warriors might be aligned with what NRL footy is about this year. Because you need, like, because everyone's talking about this, the speed of the game and all that shit. Well, I don't know, it's still rugby league. You still need to run hard. You still need to, like, manipulate numbers through your physicality and through your skill set. And I think this Warriors team has a bit of that, which is presents a fascinating matchup against the Roosters. And as we know, Roosters won the NRL women's competition on the weekend. 3 Kiwis. Leanne Tafonga on the wing. Racine McGregor, Kiwi Ferns half. She was in the halves, and we had Maya Hill-Moana starting at prop. So I went into those 3 at the top of the variety show. So the top of that segment on the variety show is me doubling down on the Roosters being the best Kiwi-NRL club in the NRL, and that is still the case here 2 days later. Like, nothing's changed, funnily enough. Joey Manu, fantastic form. Jared Whitehour-Hargreaves is still going around, still one of the best middle forwards in the NRL. Satili Tupanua starts on an edge this week for the Roosters once again. And Siosiwa Tokiaho, Aotearoa Scorpions Jr., he's off the bench. Nice little resurgent patch for Tokiaho, because there was a bit of noise last season about him possibly leaving the Roosters, possibly going to the Super League. But he's still here. And he's adding to the Roosters still, which is encouraging. No Nofahu White this season yet, but he is named on the extended bench. And also on the extended bench is Renofa Tony. He left the Bulldogs. He's from Wellington. I think he's a Aotearoa junior from Wellington. Actually, I've had a chuckle at the Bulldogs' expense a few times, Wildcard, because you think about Morgan Harper. He was at the Bulldogs. Remus Smith. He was at the Bulldogs. And then I went in. The Bulldogs won the New South Wales Cup. Might have been 2019, I think. All the Bulldogs NRL players, like players in the Bulldogs team who have gone on to play NRL, are playing NRL at other clubs. All the Newtown Jets, which align with the Cronulla Sharks, most of the players in that Jets team who played in that grand final who lost to the Bulldogs, they're playing for the Cronulla Sharks. So I don't know what the fuck the Bulldogs are doing. Like, they have consistently let all their players go. Like, they let Remus Smith go. They let Morgan Harper go. Then they sign all these other expensive outside backs. Nick Cottridge. They get Corey Allen. Like, those dudes aren't even contributing. Nick Cottridge is back at the Raiders. Corey Allen's in reserve grade. And you had all these players in your team. You had a team that won the reserve grade competition who have now left the Bulldogs. Like, it makes no sense. And that's just a shit club. But the Roosters, Wildcard. The Roosters are not a shit club. They are one of the best clubs. But something interesting is happening here with the Roosters. And this is my focus right now. A crop of Roosters recruited from Aotearoa have left the Roosters. This started when Sonny Bill returned to the Roosters and Asu Kepaoa had to make way. He went to the Tigers. He joined Kiwis coach Michael Maguire at the Tigers, and I think he had a major knee injury at the start of this year. Christian Tuipulotu. Now, if you're going to think back, the Tuipulotu was in the Warriors system, and then the Roosters rolled out the red carpet for him, took him down to Queenstown, showed him like a couple of the Roosters NRL players and, you know, a bit of mingling with the Roosters. Tuipulotu's now with the Manly Seagulls. Another player who's left, who I've talked about, is Moala Graham Taufa. He is with the Eels now. And he's playing under 21s, I think, with the Eels. So the Roosters do a great job. Like Joey Manu, everyone knows the story around Joey Manu. Fly in, fly out. He'd go to Sydney, and then he'd go back to Tokoroa to go to school for Monday and Tuesday. That's not necessarily specific to Joey Manu. That's just how the Roosters operate. There's no salary cap sombrero. They just invest their money in resourcing their Aotearoa recruitment, which is still happening. But that type of situation happened for Adam Pompey. And it's happened for a lot of other Roosters juniors from Aotearoa, Tuipulotu, Asu Kepaoa, Graham Taufa, Nofahu White. Like, all those lads have had a similar type of investment in them from the Roosters. But right now, there's quite a concentrated group of their Kiwi-NRL juniors who have gone on to play NRL, like Nofahu White, Tupanuia, Joey Manu. They are all quintessential Roosters Aotearoa recruitment. Now we've got a few more lads leaving the Roosters. So what I'm seeing is there are less Kiwi-NRL juniors in the Roosters reserve grade, in the Roosters under 21s jersey flag as well. But there is a very good crop of Kiwi-NRL juniors with the Roosters at a lower level. So there's kind of like the next wave. There's the next wave of the Joey Manu, Tupanuia, Nofahu White bracket. Guys like Benaya Ioelu, Salisi Fokete, I believe. They lead. I think there's another dude, Javan Stevenson Hulla from the Manawatu. Like, some of those lads are getting game time. Cassius Tia is a halfback in the Roosters system as well. So all of which is, I believe, is important because I've got the Roosters as the best Kiwi-NRL club in the NRL and thus the world. But there is, when we're working with the best Kiwi-NRL club, we have to observe and we have to learn what's happening with their system. And there are some of these lads leaving the Roosters system to get game time elsewhere. which is what's happening with Ronald Volkman, who the Warriors who have apparently signed. The Roosters tend to get a lot of really high quality juniors, and if that's the case, there's less opportunities for them at the NRL level. So you are seeing a lot of Roosters, Kiwi-NRL juniors leave the club, but the Roosters, being the Roosters, have another wave coming in to fill all those spots as well.
It's like, it's funny how much more efficient that ends up being when you actually put that resources in like deeper in the development like pathways, and you see like because like the trickle down economic model doesn't work, but the trickle up economic model kind of does, and this is like a rugby league equivalent of that, isn't it? Whereas it's the same in all these sports. Like if you actually like develop them so you've got better players at like age 15, 16, 17, you end up with better players at age 20, 21, 22. Like it moves upwards like that. Whereas if you go at them like targeting other, like you want to be the Bulldogs and target everybody else's backup options that all in the same. Like, I mean, RIP to Matt Duffy's NRL career. I don't know if he's coming back from that, unfortunately, because he's a player I've always liked. But so it goes. Bad business decision. You don't go from the Dragons to the Bulldogs. You just sort of taint yourself at some point.
He had no choice.
Well, he had no choice about staying at the Dragons. He maybe didn't need to go to the Bulldogs. Then again, maybe that was the only offer on the table. I don't know. Who knows. It's a pity because he is such a skillful attacking player, but just couldn't defend in any way. He's just too small. But yeah, that doesn't work nearly as well, like trying to sign talented 20, 21, 22-year-olds where you could just like you get in earlier and then you develop them to that point, and it works out cheaper in the long run. Same in all these sports. Like just quickly as well, what's the lowdown on this Volkman dude that the Warriors have scooped up?
He's starting number 6 for the Roosters under 21s this week. My everything below NRL for me is strictly Kiwi-NRL, so I don't really care for any Australian dudes. So I don't know much about him, but the Roosters have no shortage of talent. So like you can't view him leaving the Roosters as anything negative, like the Roosters hate him, so they're going to let him go. The Roosters just have so much talent that they have to pick the same way the Warriors do at a junior level, but they have a less proven track record of making the right decisions. Roosters, on the other hand, tend to make the right decisions. But I think this goes back to the idea I shared last year, where the Warriors don't have top tier juniors in the halves positions, which is fine as long as you're aware of that and you plug those holes. The Warriors have fantastic junior depth in every other position, except maybe, no, they got Aotearoa at hooker, which is good as well. But they don't have talented halves juniors from Aotearoa in their system. And what you're seeing, because they also signed Luke Metcalf from the Sharks, who's playing reserve grade. So they're bolstering their halves depth with young Australian dudes, which is interesting. And if you're thinking about the Warriors moving forward, like instead of worrying about where all these dudes fit in, just think about the Warriors. They're going to have Reece Walsh, Luke Metcalf, Chanel Harris-Tavita, Sean Johnson, Ronald Volkman, and no Ash Taylor. Like, fantastic. You just want those dudes in your club. And I think that's a good way of a good modus operandi, maybe, is just because I have identified that as a hole in their junior system. And there are halves from Aotearoa, like Cassius Tia is from Auckland, and he is with the Roosters. There's another dude from Tukaroa, I think, Cassius Cowley. He's with Wynnum. Like there are, Sione Moala was with the Warriors SG Ball team, and he is now playing Canberra Raiders under 21s. I haven't seen where Sebastian Jack is playing this season, but he was like the halves partner for the SG Ball team, and he was playing Redcliffe last season. So I don't know where he's at, but so there is like junior halves from Aotearoa, but the Warriors have identified whatever, they've done their process to identify their needs. And I think it's pretty obvious when they've signed Luke Metcalf and now they're signing Ronald Volkman. I think they also signed Dylan Walker from the Seagulls as an older veteran. And then you look at them signing Ash Taylor as an older veteran as well. What do all those signings have in common? They are Australian players who are either straight up halves or have experience in the halves. So I'm purely observing that, and it's a trend. So like, I don't know what it means, but I think it's pretty clear what is happening there. Speaking of Redcliffe though, there's only under 18s in Queensland this weekend, obviously long weekend, and Redcliffe under 18s have a bye. So there's no reserve grade Redcliffe and there's no under 21s Redcliffe. So there's no Redcliffe this weekend. But last weekend we did have Ali Leotawa scoring 4 tries in his first game for Redcliffe Dolphins. And that was the under 21s competition. He started at centre. Now, he was a member of the Warriors SG Ball team. I think he was playing fullback for most of that season. King's College first 15 player, Papatoe Panthers Junior. Yeah, scored 4 tries. Also in that under 21s team, because this was their second game of the season, but there were no Warriors, I don't think, in the round 1. I think you might have only had Zion Mai'uu in the forward pack. Whereas this round, last weekend, you had Leotawa starting at centre, Eric Afusuanga, another King's College first 15 player. He was on the wing for the under 21s. He played on the wing for the under 18s much of last season. You had Kinakepu starting at prop, Leighton Finau starting at prop, and those were the Warriors juniors. So good little sprinkling there for the under 21s. What happened when, what did we do? We had Dean Mariner scored 4 tries on Queensland Cup debut. He's from Auckland, Maris Saints Jr. Ali Leotawa, Hastings Daring Colts debut, under 21s footy in Queensland, 4 tries on debut. So all good, all good for the Kiwi-NRL stocks there. And also, I continue to be fascinated about the transition from Aotearoa to Australia, because this tells us the strength of Aotearoa Rugby League is how players transition. Obviously, everyone's different. Everyone's got a different journey, different challenges, different situations. But I am curious about how players move between the two countries and the various levels. So someone like Ali Leotawa, he was playing New Zealand Rugby League under 20s this time last year, maybe. Then he played first 15 for King's College. So he has just finished high school. Now he goes to Queensland under 21s footy and he scores 4 tries. That transition is where you learn something, right? And there are players, I'm not too equipped with the specifics, but there are players playing in the current New Zealand NZRL under 20s competition who are either with NRL clubs now or have been. And there's a bit of a crossover there, which tells me that the level of footy there isn't as big a gap between the level of footy as has previous been the case. Of course, there's a gap, but the gap isn't that big because NRL clubs are happy for juniors to stay in Aotearoa. Then again, a lot of the Southeast Queensland stuff that I've noted is dudes moving to Southeast East Queensland with their families to get better competition. But then there are other cases of players instantly leaving Aotearoa and impacting under 18s, under 21s, or reserve grade. So it's quite interesting. That transition is where you learn the most, and where I'm learning the most about the quality of Aotearoa Rugby League. Also with regards to NRL women, which reminds me, if you are a rugby league freak, there is the under 20s final and the women's final at Mount Smart Stadium this weekend, the national competitions. I think you got South Island versus Akarana maybe in the under 20s, and then you've got women's is Akarana versus County. So that's where you learn.
There you go. Is that like the transition of players moving to Oz? Is that something where you see like, because you mentioned how the Roosters tend to take it a bit like deeper and helping guys like fly back and forth and still like stay enrolled in school and stuff like that? And is that something where you see like quite drastic in like across the entire NRL scope with all the clubs? Is that something you see like quite a difference between different teams' approaches, or is there sort of like the Roosters are a little better at it than other teams perhaps, but most teams sort of have the same kind of formula or strategy or whatever? Like, is there much like, is that like a vast difference between different teams and how they do that, like how they integrate and how Kiwi players get involved?
The flying in and out is, but I don't think that's happening much pandemic onwards.
No, yeah.
That was definitely a pre-pandemic strategy, where I think a lot of the Roosters Kiwi-NRL juniors right now are in Sydney for their competitions. But what you might have is a case where someone like Benaya Iowelu, even during the pandemic, he would play SG ball or a Cyril Connell Cup, whatever it was, and then come back to Aotearoa after those 10 weeks early in the year. The fly-in, fly-out thing is unique. Interested to see if it continues with greater flexibility there. What you're seeing far more common now is like NRL clubs have academies and development camps in Aotearoa. So they will send people, or they've got like New Zealand. Yeah, here's fucking Jerry Smith. He's the Roosters New Zealand development officer. And then they have camps. I think like Daniel Anderson's heavily involved in this. So I've seen him involved with the Roosters. So then you've got a club like, so the Broncos, Dean Mariner was in Auckland, and he was part of the Broncos Academy, as well as other Broncos juniors from Aotearoa. Jordan Ricky was a great case study for that. He stayed in Christchurch while a member of the Broncos Academy, finishes school, goes to Brisbane. The Cowboys have a lot of like regional Aotearoa. So they'll have like Griffin Niami and I think one of the Fa'atili brothers was part of the Cowboys Academy development system in New Zealand. And then when they move to Australia. So the Roosters, again, it's not about the salary cap sombrero. The Roosters flex their financial muscle in investing in greater resources for their juniors, because other NRL clubs can't afford, but you can't fucking fly in Jerry Smith from Auckland to Townsville for a weekend. That's not happening, because the Cowboys can't afford it, and it's a fucking nightmare of a flight, I imagine. Roosters can do that. Whereas a lot of the other clubs, they just kind of, I'll leave us with this. We'll finish the podcast here. The fresh wrinkle is the under 20s competition in New Zealand, because players were signed from the under 20s competition in New Zealand last year. So now there is a New Zealand Rugby League under 20s competition. Like some of those dudes, like Leotawa was playing under 20s while he was still at high school. The same with Zion Mai'u. They were playing in the Auckland teams while they were still playing first 15 rugby. But then you might have other dudes who have finished school who are 18, 19 years old, and they're playing Premier Men's Rugby League in Aotearoa and under 20s this time of year. Under 20s is where the scouts are going to be watching, the recruitment officers are going to be watching. And that's the new wrinkle where as long as that under 20s competition keeps getting better and the profile keeps increasing and it becomes a solid fixture of the Aotearoa calendar, NRL clubs are going to tap in more. So then you've got a greater mix, because a lot of what we've been talking about is dudes being linked to NRL clubs when they are 14, 15, 16 years old. Well, now you're going to see players signed from the under 20s competition when they are 18, 19 years old. And I think that is a good wrinkle of NRL recruitment from Aotearoa, because we just want a wider mix. We want a wider mix of regions recruited. We want a wider mix of positions recruited. And we want a wider mix of age players recruited. We want players on the scholarship who get sent straight to Australia, who like a Sydney club might put them into a school where they play rugby union and rugby league, and then they're in the system, they're right there. But we also want the 18, 19-year-old dude who's got a chance. He impresses, he dominates the under 20s competition, and bang, smart recruitment officer signs him, develops him a bit, gets him to Australia. So we just want a wider mix, and that's part of the Kiwi-NRL takeover. In the same way, many of these young female footballers come from around Aotearoa. They're coming into the football Ferns from different situations around the world, from different regions in Aotearoa. We've got different age groups in the football Ferns. Like all these sports that we are noting greater depth and explosions of talent, the key indicator of fantastic times to be alive in this regard is the mix. And it's the mix and the variations and the wide variety of players and where they come from, how they got there, etc., etc.
Yeah, the more pathways there are for players to get to the top, the more players can get to the top, because you've first of all, you're increasing access to players. Like your 18-year-old NRL prospect isn't just like thrown on the scrap heap because they've missed their chance. Like there's more opportunities coming along, might be a late bloomer, whatever. That happens all the time, I'd imagine, especially in a sport like rugby league. And then also just the more pathways there are, the easier, more likely you are for any individual prospect to find the pathway that best suits them, rather than everyone having to go through the same one, crowding each other out. Like different players develop differently. That's part of it. Part of good player development is understanding that. So yeah, the more pathways that there are, the better situation, full stop. Like it's just going to lead to more talented players at the top end.
And big it up to one of the biggest NRL pipelines, first 15 rugby.
Yes, exactly.
That's it. That's the Niche Cast. Māori ora. Stay beautiful. Enjoy the weekend of Ja and all other religious figures. Ja bless. Kia kaha and cheer.